Hey everyone, this is Miss James, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to write a proof when you see the word median and altitude. So we kind of touched upon this in class, so this is just a refresher. If you kind of know some of these things already and you want to skip to the end, that's where I'm going to be going over proofs. I'm going to be referring to the how to write a proof in 8 easy steps. To think out loud. So steps 1 to 4 in this chart, you've seen this before if you're in our class, is just reading the question and analyzing the diagram, creating a statements and reasons T-chart, copying down your given, and copying down whatever it is you're trying to prove. But there's one thing I just have to point out. Never, ever, ever, ever write down the word prove for a reason. We've seen students do that a lot last year. You don't want to do that. Your reason has to be a legit reason, and I'll explain more in a minute. So 5, 6, 7, and 8, those are just where you're going to have to get really good in geometry. Marking up your diagram. That is like marking up your diagram. So once they start telling you things are congruent to each other, like an angle is congruent to another angle, or a side is congruent to another side, or even that lines are parallel, those are things that you would want to mark up right away, because if you don't, it's going to be harder in the end to see what it is that you were trying to prove or the reason why it works. Okay. First step 6, what we're telling you to do is to use the given information to create statements. So now, like, this is where you have to connect out either outside information that we taught you. So, like, if they talked about parallel lines cut by a transversal, you gotta start thinking of those relationships. If they told you that, if they gave you any type of vocabulary words, which is what they do a lot in proofs, you need to know those vocabulary words. That's gonna get you through step 6. So in this case, median and altitude are your vocabulary words, and we'll talk about that more throughout the video. Step 7 is analyzing your diagram to create as many statements as you can. So what we're saying here is, when you are done using your given to mark up your diagram and create statements, you need to go back to the diagram and start looking for things. So it's super duper important to do this. Like, every single time, almost every single proof, they always have one of these 3 things hidden. So vertical angles that look like this. These are formed by 2 intersecting lines. These angles are congruent. They're opposite from one another as well. Linear pairs are formed by 2 adjacent angles on a straight line. They're supplementary. And then last but not least, the key to median and altitude really shows up everywhere in these proofs, the reflexive property. You see that all the time. It's basically when 2 triangles share a side or an angle, you can then say that those things are congruent to each other. For step 8, you're finished when you get to what you're trying to prove. All we're saying for that is, when they ask you to prove 2 triangles are congruent, you're finished when you say those triangles are congruent, and then you say, because of one of the postulates or the theorems that we taught you. Okay. So a median is a line segment that starts from the vertex of a triangle and it goes through the midpoint to the opposite side. So what we mean by that is that this line is the median of this triangle. This line is CD. CD is the midpoint. And midpoints are important because midpoints divide a line segment into two congruent pieces. So that means that we could say that AD is congruent to DB. Or that this piece here is congruent to this piece here because D is in the center, it's the midpoint, and it divides it in half equally. Okay, so that's median. Altitude, it looks similar as I said before, but it's something totally different. It's similar in the fact that it's a line segment that starts from one point, one vertice of the triangle, and continues all the way down to the opposite side. But the difference here is that the altitude, instead of creating congruent pieces, creates a right angle. And the reason it does that is because altitudes create perpendicular lines. So perpendicular lines, and perpendicular lines form the right angles. So you could actually say that both of these pieces, these are both right angles. So I would write this as CD is an altitude in this triangle. And also I can say that CD, this is the symbol for perpendicular, CD is perpendicular to AB. Sorry. If you notice, when line segments are perpendicular, they kind of form this upside down T shape. So I'll outline that one more time in pink. And if you can see, that's the same shape as the perpendicular symbol. It's just something for you to, just one more way for you to remember what perpendicular looks like. Okay, so we said that CD is perpendicular to AB, and because those lines are perpendicular, you get right angles. So you could say that CDB, and you can say that CDA are right angles. Okay, so this might seem a little hard to follow. I'm going to break this down on a flowchart in a second. And this flowchart is going to be my thinking for my proofs. You'll see it in a second. So whenever you're writing a triangle congruence proof and you see the word median and altitude, these are the things that have to pop into your head. When you see median, the first thing that should come to mind is midpoint. And midpoint tells you that you're bisecting a line segment into two congruent pieces. So literally, these become your statements. When you see the word median, two statements are going to follow. One statement is going to be midpoint. So you're going to say like a point is the midpoint. After you say that that point is the midpoint, you're going to say that two pieces are congruent because it's being bisected. Again, this might be weird to follow. I'm going to use this example in a proof, so it'll be a lot less confusing when you see it used. When you see the word altitude, you need to start thinking about perpendicular lines. Altitudes creates perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines create right angles, and right angles are always congruent. So in a proof that mentions the word altitude, 3 statements are going to follow that. Perpendicular lines, followed by right angles, followed by right angles are always congruent. And you'll write it in that order. The very cool thing about the way this flowchart works is all these 2 statements, what's written before it becomes the reason. So if I say that if they give me that a line segment is a median, then I'm able to say that one of the points on the line is a midpoint. And then once I say midpoint, I can say I knew that because of the definition of a median. Then my next statement will be about 2 pieces being congruent. And I could say that those 2 pieces are congruent because the definition of a midpoint. And they tell me, when they give me the word altitude, I'm going to talk immediately about lines being perpendicular. And I'm going to say that I knew that because definition of altitude. And then then I'll be able to mention that 2 angles in the picture are right angles. And I can say I knew that because definition of perpendicular lines form right angles. And after that, I can talk about the angles being congruent because right angles are congruent. So this is what this is going to look like. I'll show you. In the proof, it tells me that what's given. So CA is congruent to CB and CD is an altitude. They're asking me to prove that triangle CAD is perpendicular to triangle CBT. So the way I'm going to do that, as I said before, I'm going to model using the 8 easy steps how to write a proof. So I read the question. That was step 1, created the statements and reasons chart. Step 2, wrote down my given. That was step 3. Step 4 is to skip some space and copy down what it is that you're trying to prove. So I don't know the reason why, so I'm just going to write this at the bottom. Exactly what they told me. Triangle CAD is congruent triangle CBD. Don't know the reason why, and I don't know the number that's going to be, but I'm just going to write that down for now. It's just a way for me to track my thinking. So after that, step 5 says to use the given information to mark up my diagram. So the only thing that I could use for my given information is that CA is congruent to CB. And I can show that those 2 sides are congruent by using tick marks. Step 6 says to use your given information to create as many statements as you can. Continue to mark up your diagram if needed. So here is where the vocabulary comes in. We talked about altitude, and we said that when we see the word altitude, the next thing that we have to mention is perpendicular lines. So let's do that. We're going to say that line segment CD is perpendicular to line segment AB. And we know this because the definition of altitude. So, how did I know which sides to name, you might be asking? Well, as I said before, The perpendicular symbol is an upside down T. And one way to figure out which lines are perpendicular to each other is to kind of look for that upside down T shape. So if you see CD, it's perpendicular to AB. Okay. So we just use CD is an altitude. So what comes after altitude? We said perpendicular lines. So we use that. After perpendicular lines have been talked about, we have to mention right angles because perpendicular lines make right angles. So this angle is a right angle, and so is this one. So I'm able to say angle CDB and angle CDA are right angles. And the reason I'm able to say that, you guessed it, perpendicular lines form right angles. Okay, step 4. So I use my given information to mark up my diagram, and then I use the given information to create new statements. So now the only thing that I can do is go back to my diagram and study it. So we said that in a proof, you can't assume anything, but the only things that kind of jump out at you every single time in our experience that we've seen in proofs are vertical angles, linear pairs, and the reflexive property. Do you see any of that here in this picture? Of course you do. If you look closely at the picture, both of these triangles share side CD. So that means that we can say that CD is congruent to CD. And the reason that we could say that is the reflexive property. So now we're able to prove that our triangles are congruent. You might be asking, Ms. James, how are we able to prove that? Because I'm looking at my diagram and I don't necessarily see all the information. I see a side, I see another side and an angle. That's SSA. We said that doesn't work unless it's a right triangle, which it is, and then we can use side-side angle, but it's not called that. It's called the H-out theorem. So in this triangle, the hypotenuse is congruent to another hypotenuse, and a leg is congruent to itself. So we can say, because of the H-out theorem, these triangles are congruent. Okay. We're going to do the next one. So, similar to the one before, we're going to be using the flowchart over here to kind of help us identify which statements and reasons we need for this proof. So in this proof, they gave us that AB is congruent to CB, BT is a median of AC, and they're asking us to prove triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. So again, for my 8 easy steps to write a proof, I read the question, I'm studying the diagram as we speak. I created a statements and reasons chart. I copied on my given word for word. So all that's left for me to do is skip some space and copy down what it is that I'm trying to prove. So triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. Again, I don't know why these triangles are congruent, but so I'm not going to worry about that yet. My next step says I need to use the given information to mark up my diagram. So this means I'm explicitly looking at my diagram for things that they tell me that I can mark up right away. So AB is congruent to CB. Definitely can mark that up. I can use tick marks. So AB congruent to CB. Now that I marked that up, that's the only statement that I can mark up from my diagram. The next thing that I could do is use my given information to create as many statements as I can. So I'm going to continue to mark up my diagram as needed as well. So the next thing that comes from the given is that BD is the median of AC. So we said when you see the word median, you need to think to yourself, medians create midpoints, and midpoints create congruent pieces. So I can say that D is the midpoint of line segment AC. And the reason that I could say that is the definition of median. Again, medians create midpoints. So in my reason, when I named that D is the midpoint, my statement where I named that D is the midpoint, my reason is the definition of median. Okay. What's next? So after we talked about midpoint, then we have to say two pieces are congruent. So if D is the midpoint, that means that now AD is congruent to CD. That has to be true because midpoints create two congruent pieces. So AD is congruent to CD. And again, I'm able to say that because the definition of midpoint. Okay. So I used the given to mark on my diagram. I created as many statements as I could from my given, which was these things. And then all I can now do is study my diagram. And I'm looking for vertical angles, linear pairs, or the reflexive property. In this case, I see the reflexive property. So now I'm able to mark that on my chart. So I can say BT is congruent to BT. And that is because of the reflexive property. And so I can now prove that these two triangles are congruent. I have enough information. I have a side congruent to a side, another side congruent to another side, and a final side congruent to itself. So therefore, I'm able to use the SSS postulate to prove that these two triangles are congruent to each other. Last but not least, I'm going to show you guys one last problem with both median and altitude together. Get ready for this one. It is a long one. So I encourage you to try this one out with me. Pause your screen. See if you could do this at the same time as me. Or maybe beat me. So, using my 8 easy steps, I'm going to read the question. Given in triangle PQR, BQ is both the median and the altitude. Prove that triangle RQB is congruent to triangle PQB. So I'm going to write RQB is congruent to triangle PQB. So now I read the question, created a statements and reasons chart, copied down my given word for word, and I skipped some space to copy down what I was trying to prove. The next thing for me to do is mark up my diagram. But when we mark up our diagram, we're looking for things that they explicitly tell us are either congruent or parallel or information like that. So in this case, there's nothing for me to directly mark up yet because I need to use like some outside information. I need to use my knowledge of geometry. So I'm going to start first by talking about median. So it says that in this triangle, BQ is both the median and the altitude. So I'll start with median. When we talk about median, the first thing that should come to our mind is midpoint. So I should be able to say that B is the midpoint of RP. And the reason I'm able to say that is the definition of median. And then after we talk about midpoints, we talk about pieces being congruent. So I'm going to mark this on my diagram. If B is the midpoint, that means that RB is congruent to PB. And the reason I'm able to say that is the definition of midpoint. Okay, so I literally talked about everything I could talk about for the word median. So now I need to talk about everything I need to talk about for altitude. So for altitude, there's 3 things that I have to state. I'm going to write small because I don't want to run out of space. So when we mention altitude, we have to talk about lines being perpendicular. So I'm going to look for the T-shape and kind of outline that. We said QB is the altitude or BQ is the altitude. So this line is perpendicular to that line. So I write this as line BQ is perpendicular to line RP. And that is because the definition of altitude. When you talk about the perpendicular lines, it's the definition of altitude. Definition of altitude. Okay, so I use this statement. After we talk about altitude, I can now say there's right angles in my picture. So I can say angle QBR and angle QBP are right angles. And the reason I can say that is because perpendicular lines form right angles. Okay. Lastly, I can say those angles are congruent. So, and I'm sorry, it's getting super small. I just don't want to run out of space. Angle QBR is congruent to angle QBP. And I can say that because right angles are congruent. So I used all the statements now that I could use for both median and altitude. I marked that on my diagram. So now the only thing left to do is look at my diagram to see, do I see any type of linear pair, vertical angle, or reflexive property? Surprise, the reflexive property. So now I can look at my picture and I have enough information to prove these triangles are congruent. Actually, let me write this in first. I'm getting ahead of myself. Step 7. QB is congruent to QB because of the reflexive property. So now, as I was saying, I now have enough information to prove these triangles congruent. I have a side congruent to a side, an angle congruent to an angle, and then third side congruent to itself. So my last step would be side, and these triangles are congruent because of the SAS postulate. Be careful here, just because it's a right angle. In the picture, some people would automatically jump to say, oh, it's the HL theorem. But it's not the HL theorem, because the HL theorem says you need to have a hypotenuse congruent to a leg and another hypotenuse congruent to another leg. And in this triangle, we know nothing about the hypotenuses being congruent. So therefore, we can only say SAS. Okay, that was a really long video. I hope this helps you to review using the words median and altitude in a proof. And I hope it gave you a better understanding of just how to write triangle proofs. Good luck, guys.